what it'd be like to there, maybe, because it was like to there, and now
Good morning, everyone. This is Tosin Akande speaking. We'll get started in about a minute or two, just waiting for some more people to log on. And again, thank you so much for joining this session. And we'll get started soon. All righty, let's get started. Good morning again. Thank you so much for joining this presentation. And yes, my the bookshelf behind me is empty because this is in my office. We're still recovering here from the storm we had back in February. So I'm just borrowing the space for the summer summit. My name is Tosin Akande. I am the bullying prevention specialist here with the Department of Education. It's always my pleasure to present on bullying and bullying prevention. A quick housekeeping things before we get started. If you have any questions at any time throughout this presentation, please feel free to put it in the chat box. My contact information would be on the slides as well, I think on the last one, so you can always contact me. Yes, we do have presentations for, yes, we do have a certificate for this session. And also this session is being recorded, so please be mindful of that. So today we're going to be talking about the foundational knowledge of bullying and bullying prevention. We're going to go over the scope and definition of bullying as required by legislation. And then we'll talk about trauma, ACEs, and bullying, what the impact of trauma on bullying and why children engage in bullying behaviors in and outside of school. And then we'll talk about roles children play in bullying situations in school, how we can intervene, how we can stop that on the spot. Secondly, we'll talk about implementing the multi-tiered systems of support, and that is the MTSS. We're going to break it down into each levels, and I'll provide resources for each level of the MTSS. Then we'll wrap up this entire presentation on hope and resiliency and how that is important to effective bullying prevention in schools. Then I plan to finish about 10-15 minutes early to allow for questions in the chat box, questions and comments in the chat box. So please, let's get started. Okay, so bullying means any pattern of harassment, intimidation, threatening behavior, and the rest of this paragraph. This is a lengthy paragraph. This is the definition. This is the legislative definition of bullying in Oklahoma. However, if you look at different definitions across the board, and that includes the CDC's different prevention or activist organizations against bullying, they all have common themes. And the three main common ones are pattern or repetition, intent or motivation, and negative educational or physical outcomes. okay? And sometimes some definitions do have imbalance of power or unwanted behavior as well. So when we talk about bullying, this definition, as we can see, covers all forms of bullying. It talks about physical, verbal, electronic types of bullying, and relational types of bullying as well. So this is a very detailed definition that we have, thankfully, that we have in Oklahoma. I always have an asterisk by pattern or repetition because I like to remind my participants and students that sometimes, a lot of times, severity rules out pattern. If an incident or a situation is so severe, then we don't wait for it to happen again before we address it. To quickly talk about cyberbullying and the special concerns that we have for cyberbullying, electronic and social media have become so widespread that anyone can post anything about anyone. And that talks about the ability to be anonymous online on social media. We've had students create fake accounts to further torture their targets online. And also, it might not even be the students at school. It could be a random person on the internet operating under false identity to target children. It can persist because digital devices allow 24-hour access and communication. That is very true. Unlike the traditional types of bullying that we're familiar with, cyberbullying is very easy to go unnoticed because of the nature. A lot of times when we hear or know about cyberbullying, it's because the target is speaking up about it. And thirdly, it can become permanent online. Yes, we've heard this on the news about people posting things 10 years ago online, and now it's coming back to haunt them. People have been denied job opportunities, scholarships, school admissions because of what they posted online. So all of this, including the last one, which is cyberbullying can be very difficult to notice by adults, is why we like to pay special attention to cyberbullying, especially given now that there is an increased use in technology or due to distance learning. And another thing, one thing that I forgot to mention about the second one, about how cyberbullying can persist 24 hours is, I don't know if anyone is paying attention to what's going on the news as regards to Christy Teigen and her issues with cyberbullying. Again, like I said, when things like this come up, it's because the targets have probably had enough or they've been empowered to speak up and to speak out against the behavior. Common myths about bullying. Number one, students who bully are loners. No, they are not. Actually, that's what makes their bullying very effective, because they have friends and supporters that engage in the behavior. Secondly, students who bully have low self-esteem and are insecure. This is actually the opposite. It's low self-esteem and insecurity. It's normally true for students who are targeted by the behavior. Low self-esteem and insecurity is actually a recipe or one of the reasons of being a target of a bullying behavior. Students who bully actually have high self-esteem. As I mentioned previously, they have friends, they have high self-esteem, they have the social capital to inflict this pain on others. Thirdly, students bully others because they want attention. As opposed to attention, students bully others because they want connection. And this is just one out of many reasons why children engage in bullying behaviors. Next, bullying behavior is a normal part of kids being kids. No, bullying is not a normal part of childhood. Peer conflict is a normal part of childhood, but bullying behavior is not. Bullying has detrimental consequences for everyone involved in it, including the bully, the perpetrator, the target or the victim, and the bystanders. And that is, in essence, the entire school community. Lastly, only boys bully others. That couldn't be farther from the truth. Anyone can engage in bullying behaviors, including adults and children, and girls and boys alike. It just happens to be that boys tend to engage in physical or the obvious type of bullying that we know, and girls tend to go with relational or social bullying, also cyberbullying as well. Girls' aggression, unlike boys, tends to go unnoticed because it can be very subtle. So, bullying foundational knowledge. Bullying is a type of aggression in which harm is repeatedly inflicted on a target with less power than the perpetrator. As I mentioned earlier, this is an aspect of power imbalance. And power imbalance can be in different forms. It could be in terms of socioeconomic status. It could be even social status within the school system. Could be intellectual power differences, could be physical power, and other types of power imbalances within that school community. There are different forms of the behavior, that is true. We have the physical, verbal, relational, and cyber aspects of bullying. Bullying is a group process. It is a group process. Bullying is hardly ever just one person to the other. No, there are almost always people involved, people cheering on the activity, people not directly involved, but they are very happy to see or to just watch what's going on. And with the image on the right, we'll get to talk about this a little bit later and watch a video on the bullying circle and how children engage in this circle, how the group process works. Bullying does not occur in a vacuum. That is very correct. There are so many factors within a school system or within a school environment that can either encourage or discourage children's engagement in bullying behaviors. All forms of bullying are equally detrimental to the targets, the bullies, and the bystanders. Yes, bullying can have long-lasting effects on children. And those effects could include decreased academic performance, negative psychological adjustments, and other types of effects that could even persist into adulthood. Trauma and bullying. How does trauma relate to bullying? I've mentioned in my previous presentations on adverse childhood experiences. These are experiences that are potentially traumatic that could occur between the age of 0 and 17. According to the adverse childhood experience survey, the ACE survey, there are 10 listed adverse childhood experience that a child might experience before the age of 17. And those include all a different type of abuse. It could be physical, verbal, sexual abuse in and outside of the home, witnessing violence in the home, incarceration, losing a member or a primary caregiver to suicide, or in one way or to different situation. And then secondly, we have toxic stress. So children cope with adverse childhood experiences or trauma by in different ways. And this could incur toxic stress on their system. Toxic stress is the exposure to stressful and prolonged Toxic stress is the exposure to stressful and prolonged situations without adequate support. Toxic stress is one of the reasons that children engage in unhealthy coping behaviors, and that could be smoking, drinking, drugs, or even engaging in risky sexual behaviors. And lastly, we'll talk about resiliency. Resiliency is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity or trauma. So resiliency and hope is very important to bullying prevention. Resiliency is the ability to bounce back. Resiliency is the ability to overcome. It involves being flexible, being able to adapt to changing situations in life. Unlike what people might think, resiliency isn't about enduring undue stress or abuse. It's just having the skills to manage what life throws at you and having the right support in your circle to help you overcome some challenges. Bullying and ACEs, again, as I've just mentioned, ACEs are those experiences that are within the child's control, things that happen to them before or within the age of, between the age of 0 and 17. However, although bullying is not listed as an ACE, bullying is a form of youth violence with negative consequences. On the bottom left, I have the cycle of chronic stress and trauma and how chronic stress could lead to skills deficiency, which is another reason for why children engage in behavior. Could be a lack of interpersonal skills and how to relate in the school environment. And in turn, they just lash out and engage in unhealthy behaviors within the school system. Then they engage in this challenging behavior, which would be bullying. And of course, in some environments, the response of the school is punitive discipline, and sometimes punitive discipline can be further traumatizing, and hence we have this cycle continuing. On the right, then I have the cycle of bullying involvement. So we have susceptibility to bullying. This is another way of understanding why children engage in bullying behaviors and how to intercept this or to break the cycle. So we have susceptibility to bullying. There are so many reasons why children might be susceptible to bullying. And as I've mentioned, ACEs is one of them, trauma is one of them, a school environment that condones such behavior is another reason why children are susceptible to bullying. Then they're susceptible to it and they engage in the behavior. And when I talk about children engaging in bullying behavior, it could be as a perpetrator, as a bystander, as a target, or all of the above. And then they start to exhibit the associated effect of bullying. And it varies from child to child, but there is a wide array of effects of bullying, and thus the cycle continues. So there is a positive, in essence, there is a positive feedback loop between ACEs, trauma, and students' engagement in bullying behaviors. Now let's get introduced to the multi-tiered system of support. Yes, there are 3 levels to the multi-tiered system of support, the MTSS. Number 1 at the bottom in the green is the universal prevention, universal strategies and instructions for all students. I would say this is the most important step, as this targets every and all members of the school community. And secondly, we have the early intervention. This is for children that are having milder symptoms of trauma or belong to a high risk group. These are children that are having a little bit of a difficulty grasping the ideas and the concept of tier 1. Then we have tier 3, the intensive intervention for our ultimate at-risk students in school. Every school has them, every classroom has them. This is intensive and ongoing interventions for few students deeply impacted by trauma. And it might not even be trauma, just students that are having a very hard time understanding the concept of tier 1, tier 2, or might need a little bit extra help for in bullying prevention. So on the right, I have what MTSS involves. It includes trauma-informed care, empowerment, collaboration, value, choices, safety, and trust. And on the right, we have all the key areas that the MTSS covers. The MTSS is a comprehensive model that helps us address bullying at different stages and different levels for the entire school community. Elements of effective bullying prevention. This is school-wide, and as the presentation go on, I'll talk more about the classroom level intervention strategies that we have. So on the school-wide level for tier 1, and that is 80 to 90% of the students will be able to understand what's going on this level. This is where we introduce the evidence-based programs and practices, staff and student learning, peer engagement, and social support and strategies. Then I have data systems and monitoring. This is where we set up our functioning and systems in that school community, proactive policies, procedures, and practices. This is just the fundamental, the basics of bullying prevention in any and every school system. Then for those students in tier 2, we have increased adult supervision. This is when we're now zooming in on a few students that might be having some difficulties. We have increased access to academic support for these children, opportunity for positive reinforcements. This is where we bring in role modeling, engaging outside community, community engagement, family involvement. Tier 2 would be the perfect level for that. And then focus on possible function of problem behaviors. This is when sometimes we take a step back to address some fundamental needs or try to understand why these children are having a hard time understanding what's going on in tier 1. And it could be something as simple as just meeting their basic needs. Some children engage in bullying behaviors because they don't have their basic needs met. When we talk about hunger, homelessness, not having clean clothes, not having warmth. This is where we pay attention to those things. And lastly, for tier 3, we have referrals, alternative placement. It can include assistance from outside agencies. This is where we leverage the partnerships in the school environment, and we provide more frequent, intense, and individualized support for children in tier 3. Again, this is on the school level. This is massive. This involves a whole, a different level of planning and comprehensive strategies. So now being said, let's talk about tier 1. Let's go into tier 1. And now I will talk more about classroom strategies that we can use for bullying prevention. So the classroom strategy could be as simple as just setting behavioral expectations from the beginning of class. Of course, it's more effective when there is children involvement and children input in setting these expectations. We ought to develop rules with students so they set their own climate of respect and responsibility. And of course, create expectations that are safe, predictable, and consistent consequences. Okay, this is very important because here we're trying to build trust in the system. The consistent consequences part is very important because students need to understand that your bullying rules work the same for everybody. Secondly, I have class meetings on here. This is a no-blame approach, and this is in the place to address specific personal issues, but just to talk about broad topics. For example, as I mentioned earlier about Christy Teigen, this would be a perfect class discussion topic or class meeting topic to talk about the effects and the consequences of cyberbullying, even if it happened years ago. The importance of not posting unkind things online and how it might come back to haunt you in the future. Of course, if you feel like a child or if you notice that a child is struggling to discuss certain topics, you know your children more than anyone in the school, you can always follow up as needed. And at the bottom of my slides, I have the active links to more resources if you would like to go in depth into all this. For tier 1, I also have teaching empathy and assertiveness. So this is very important in building or helping children to be more hopeful and resilient in the face of trauma or challenges. I'm not sure if I have the slide, but I get to mention of the what not to do's in bullying prevention. I've heard it more times than not when children are encouraged to fight back or to stand up for themselves. While it sounds very good for children to have that skill to be able to stand up for themselves and fight back, they have to be equipped with the right skills and resources. And empathy and assertiveness are those skills that children need to have in order to be able to fight back. For empathy, we can teach that by modeling the behavior, teaching point of view. Again, the Christy Teigen one would be a great example to talk about right now because a lot of people know about it. And of course, we have to engage in active listening. Children do talk to adults when they feel like the adult is approachable and they feel like the adult will take the situation rather seriously. Teaching assertiveness, we can discuss different communication styles. We can communicate assertiveness in different ways, and we can help children understand the difference between passive communication, aggressive communication, and assertive communication. This also have to do with positive coping skills. There are different coping skills, but there is a difference between the positive ones and the negative one. And assertiveness is a skill that is important for everyone and anyone to have. And lastly, we can help children identify and understand their emotions and socially acceptable ways of expressing them. A good example that I like to use for this is the In and Out movie. They have different emotions in that movie, and all of them are important to all of us. We all have all those emotions. However, there are time and places for how you can express or how those emotions come out and are expressed. So here is what I talk about, that we're going to talk about children's roles in bullying situations. So here I have 8 different positions, 8 different roles that children can engage in bullying behaviors. And we're going to watch this video in a little bit. So when we watch this video, please, I would like you to just put in the chat box what you feel stand out to you, what you notice, or yeah. So here is that video.
The bullying circle, again, really a critical point of the delineation about what's significant about how the process of bullying prevention really works in a school. A lot hinges on how this thing floats out in terms of its engagement with everybody having a role in the issue of bullying. And that's what we wanted to make sure we visually do today.
Oh no, here they come again. Well, what are they going to say now? I wish I could just disappear. This is too hard for me. Man, do I hate school.
I think Gail is so stupid. I mean, look at her clothes. Like, where did she get those clothes? At the loser store?
Wow, Gail isn't very cool. I agree with Karen. Yeah, what's your problem, geek?
Oh, I really like Karen and Mariana. They're so cool. I don't usually say anything when they pick on people, but I'm laughing and letting others know what's going on so they can get a laugh too.
Well, I think it's funny too, but I try to seem innocent enough. I really don't want to get into trouble. I may let the guys know later what happened, but yeah, you know, she is kind of goofy. I mean, just look at her. Look at Gail.
Hey, this is none of my business. I try not to even notice, and when I do, I pretend not to see it. The less attention I get from these people, the better. This is making me sick. Those kids have no right to do those things. That poor kid is being bullied, did nothing to deserve that. But I really can't say anything. I don't want to be the next person to be bullied. Besides, what could I do anyway?
I can't take it anymore. I just have to do something. But what should I do? Maybe I could talk to Gail later and say I'm sorry that it happened. I might even go over there right now.
But one of the important pieces in terms of the bullying circle is to really do sort of a brainstorm with kids about what do you need to do? What can you do if in fact somebody was being bullied?
The bullying circle is just the schematic. It's actually a chart that shows the various roles that people play. I think one of the most important parts of this is that people sometimes assume that you are either a child who harms another or you are the child who is being harmed, and they don't recognize that there are actually 8 different roles that people can choose to play when there's a bullying situation. So it shows all from A to G in our scheme, the different roles that people can play and how those roles interact and how they can shift from time to time. The bullying circle is really a key component of the obvious bullying prevention program. And once children and adults are exposed to that and they begin to explore what roles are in this group process of bullying, that they can learn how to choose a healthier way of supporting people who are being harmed and being hurt.
Okay, so thank you so much for watching that. And I do.
It's all coming together, and teachers and school staff have worked hard.
So yeah, I went through the comments and I saw how that a couple people really liked the video. So this is what I typically do when I go on presentations for bullying prevention in schools. It helps us understand how children engage in bullying behaviors. One thing that always sticks out to me when I do this activity is that if you notice, the majority of the children present in that situation were not actively involved in the bullying. And this is why tier 1 is very important, because if we can target those students, about 4 out of 8 students, if we can target those students, then we can turn them into possible defenders in bullying situations. At least we can empower them to do something, to know the rules in the school system, to know who to report to and how to address those bullying situations if they do not feel comfortable stepping in a bullying situation. Somebody asked a question about how can bullying be a means of seeking connection, or bullying as a means of seeking connection. So as I mentioned, that children engage in bullying for different behavior, for different reasons. Some children that are traumatized do not know how to make friends. My position here involved receiving calls from across the state on bullying situations in different schools, in all public schools and districts. So we've had situations where, for one reason or the other, the last one was a child who has a medical difficulty or a medical challenge that actually makes him aggressive and does not, and because of that, is having a hard time making friends. So he engaged in this bullying behavior, thinking that he can bully people or bully other students into being his friends. So now we have to work with the family and we have to work with the school on how to help him develop interpersonal skills. Number one, to help him deal with his medical challenge, and then develop the skills to help him make friends and be kind to his classmates, to be his friends and to play with him. You typically see this in elementary school area where children can they're more, I wouldn't say assertive, but they're just so blunt and aggressive in their communication that they can just, tell you you're my friend and you have to be my friend because I said so. But of course, that's not how it works. And sometimes we also do have children that because of the difficulties they've had in their lives, sometimes children that are growing up in the foster care system and group homes, they just don't have the skills to properly communicate their needs, and therefore they become more aggressive. They think aggression is the appropriate way of expressing themselves based on what they've seen or the experiences they've had in their lives. So of course, those are not acceptable experiences in the school system. What do you do about teachers who bully kids? I will talk about this a little bit later, more in depth when I get to your policy. The school policy, the school policy should address every forms of bullying in the school system. I've mentioned this before in other presentations, that aside from the forms of bullying that we know, the physical, verbal, physical types of bullying, there are other types of bullying as well. And that includes adults to children bullying and family to teacher bullying as well. Teachers do get bullied in the school system by families and by their co-workers in the school environment as well. So your school policy, if we talk about bullying, should address bullying, period, regardless of who's involved. Why? Because children notices and children see things in the school. Children hear when teachers are talking back and forth about a child or their fellow co-worker in that school environment. So as I said, we're going to talk about a comprehensive, or the importance of a comprehensive bullying prevention policy in the school system. Now, I'm very careful when adults are involved in bullying. When an adult is constantly involved in a bullying situation, we might be crossing over to harassment, and then that's a different situation on its own. So bullying prevention by grade level. Remember, we're still in tier 1. This is all still tier 1. Yes, I got this from our FAQ page on the bullying prevention website that we have here. Yes, schools are required to teach bullying prevention, and I've broken it down on different levels, so appropriate standards for each level. And this is also mandated by the C3 standards for health and safety education. So if you are not comfortable or you don't know what to teach children as regards to bullying prevention in school, elementary school, or depending on their grade level, this is a good starting point. You can just teach this. The beauty of bullying prevention is that it can be very diverse. It can be very fun. So you can incorporate skills and other types of themes or creative ways to teach bullying. It doesn't always, because I'm trying not to make bullying a buzzword. I'm trying not to get people desensitized to the word bullying. So I try to just encourage people to teach bullying without even bringing up the word bullying if they can. Adult responsibilities. The number one is to be approachable. Having zero tolerance isn't always the best way to prevent bullying, especially in the classroom. Okay, children have to feel comfortable to come to you, to talk to you, even to mention something in passing. Not every child would seek to just cry and break down and be vulnerable, but they might just talk about it in passing, and we as adults have to take it seriously. A great example is, as people know, people that have attended my presentation before know that I do enjoy the royal family sometimes, and I've watched The Crown. So there is a scene in that Crown show where Prince Edward was telling his mom, the Queen, that he was getting bullied at school. And as he was telling it, based on his mom's reaction, it was like, oh no, it's not a big deal. I mean, yeah, yes, I did get shoved and pushed, but you know, it's no big deal or whatever. Yes, kids try to downplay it for obvious reasons, perhaps because they fear retaliation or they just don't want it blown up out of proportion. But again, we are mandatory reporters in school. Even if nothing happens, we have to report, document, and tell whoever is in charge, be it the administrator or the bullying prevention coordinator in our various schools. Validate, because we don't know the situation when a child comes and report bullying, we really don't know what happens, especially if we weren't there. It's important not to just discredit the student. I know this is very hard, especially if the reporter is a child that is notorious for engaging in bullying behaviors anyway. So that can be a little bit tricky. And lastly, take action. Take action, but don't be a fixer. Take action according to the procedures laid out in your school's bullying prevention policy. So common mistakes to avoid in bullying prevention: telling a child to ignore the bullying. As I mentioned earlier about the importance of hope and resiliency, ignoring bullying is not a healthy way of coping with bullying or of addressing bullying behaviors, because sometimes it can encourage children to internalize these behaviors. And that's why whenever, sometimes when we have tragic things happen in school, it's because these children have suppressed these feelings for so long and they just lashed out. And instead of telling children to ignore the bullying, we can help them develop skills, empathy, and assertiveness, as I mentioned, to help them effectively address it and stand up for themselves. Secondly, we cannot be a fixer when children tell us about bullying. And I think this applies more to parents. I cannot tell you how many times parents have called my office asking if I could help them set up a meeting with the other family as well. No, I cannot do that. And that is something that I wouldn't even encourage the school to do. But in smaller communities, we've had parents show up to the other kid's house to talk about the situation, and I wouldn't advise that for anybody. Or even, bringing the children together, having them hug it out. No, that is a no-no. Blaming the child for being bullied. Again, this goes back to telling the child to stand up for themselves, fight back without properly equipping them to do so. Encouraging the child to retaliate, of course, that's not acceptable. And we can just go down the list of all this unacceptable or things we should avoid in bullying prevention. Oh, again, confusing bullying with conflict and general bad behavior. As I mentioned earlier, that I would not like the word bullying to be a buzzword. Everything is not bullying, and some things are just peer conflict. And unlike bullying, peer conflict is actually very, very important to a child's development. It helps them develop. Collaboration skills, interpersonal skills, conflict resolution skills, taking turns, other skills that are important can be developed with peer conflict, and it's not bullying. So we should not always exaggerate every misunderstanding to bullying. So responding to parents' questions. This is the level. Tier 1 is also the level where you have parents asking questions, parent demanding that a teacher does this, a teacher does that. And again, it's important to have a comprehensive bullying prevention policy. So number 1 is to listen with empathy and compassion and let the parent know they've been heard. Yes, the parent have been heard, but ultimately, whatever an administrator can do to address the bullying situation is written out, is laid out in their policy. So I thank them for bringing the matter to the school's attention. That's what I do when family calls my office as well, because a lot of bullying situations that I know about I wouldn't have known about them had the parent or the family not called to let me know. And then I provide steps and options for a solution. I let them talk, and then I ask them and I tell them, well, here's what I can do. And of course, that is well within the policy. If needed, develop a safety or behavior plan in line with the school's bullying prevention policy. Sometimes the parents just want to be aside from wanting to be heard, they just want to know that their child is safe in school. And provide a timeline for action plan if you could, and then follow up for feedback as necessary. So for teachers, when I talk about being approachable, helping children, or just having this conversation with children, I would highly encourage every teacher to go on or to complete the OK Cognito stimulation training. I have completed it as well. It helps us develop the skills to help children navigate this world and help them have these conversations, or what to do when a children tells you certain things. Should you report? How should you handle the situation? It's been very helpful to me. I've gotten my certificate, and I would highly encourage everyone on this call to just, even if you're not doing it for the certificate, just to get the training or to get the understanding of how to have certain conversations with students. And then again, for tier 1, I would like to just put this out there for us to, this is a checklist that we can take to see how emotionally safe our classroom is. Is your classroom emotionally safe? It has four categories of needs: the need for success, the need for dignity and respect, the need for power structure and positivity, the need for recognition, attention, and emotional safety. So based on the outcome of this checklist, you can then modify your classroom to be more positive and inclusive, or emotionally safe. So as we talked about with the video, that majority of the people that are involved in bullying situations are bystanders or witnesses. And I would like to just focus our attention right now on those students, because they are the majority, to help them develop the skills to be effective witnesses. Instead of saying, I don't want to be involved, and this is not my business, we have to build a sense of community that even if they're not physically involved or directly involved in that situation, talking to the right adult, telling the right person, following up the chain of command could also be ways that they can positively get involved in that situation. And the first step is to promote an atmosphere of trust and safety in the classroom. And secondly, be a positive adult role model. Again, going back to addressing all forms of bullying. A teacher who's being bullied or who is bullying others and is not a great role model for addressing bullying in their classroom as well. Because as we know, children tend to learn from what they see than what we just tell them to do. Develop strong, positive relationship with students. Acknowledge that bullying does occur and can be painful. Then that goes to the consequences, the impact of bullying to everyone involved. Intervene and model positive behaviors when you see bullying behavior occur. As I mentioned, this would be a great point to talk about what's going on the news, what are their opinion, how do they perceive it, how can they mitigate the issues, because real life experiences provide children with realistic examples of what could actually happen, and it's not like just talking to them based on theory. No, these are actually real life experiences that happen to real people with real consequences. Provide time for students to learn and practice bystander skills. And just like teaching bullying as well, we can teach the skills with different resources. We can teach it in different ways. A book I presented to a school using a book. The title is "There Is No Such Thing as a Dragon." It's an old children's book, but it's about ignoring a situation in your life and then it grows out of proportion. So those are the type of things I do. Even as a bullying prevention specialist, I try not to go out in front of people and just bombard them by saying bullying, bullying all the time. Bystander intervention skills, you could walk away if you don't feel comfortable or if the situation is being as escalated to a level beyond your control. You can always offer support as a bystander, report the incident, and speak up assertively if you could. So tier 2, that's all I have for tier 1. Tier 2 strategies for prevention. Again, as I've mentioned earlier, this is the level where we're now bringing in more outside resources. And the first one is mentoring. Mentoring kids. Tier 2 is very effective for students who already lack a positive adult role models, for students who lack a sense of belonging at school, for students who do not believe in the rewards and consequences, or maybe the rewards and consequences of a school environment has been proven ineffective for this particular students. And lastly, mentoring is great for students who appear to lack self-esteem and self-confidence. So mentoring could come in different forms. When I was in school, and I've seen it in different schools as well, depending on the resources that you have available in your community, the school could have partnership with the police department, with out of school agencies, with other adult agencies out there where you have other professional adults come into school and engage with your children. And this is a place where I would say this is very important to start the mentoring on this level, because then it can prevent children from having the negative experiences with these agencies in the future. And it could be a mental health agency or the police agency. Secondly, to have targeted social skills instruction. This is where we now want to focus on the skills that children are lacking. Children in these skills tend to lack resiliency. So we want to build some resiliency enhancing skills. And that would be self-awareness, self-management, self-regulation, and self-expression, and how to interact with others in pro-social ways. And lastly, to provide positive feedbacks for when they engage or when they display those skills that we're trying to help them gain. A lot of us might have heard of the check-in, check-out system. This is also a great way for increasing supervision of the kids. The check-in, check-out system could work for both the perpetrator and targets of bullying. So for a child that does not feel safe in school because they've been targeted, they've been targets of bullying, the check-in, check-out system will allow somebody to be responsible for their whereabouts at different times during the school period. And for the perpetrator of bullying, the check-in, check-out system would help us provide feedback. Okay, this is how you did in that class, and just throughout the day, just to give them feedback on their behavior. And it doesn't have to be one person doing it. It could be just different people throughout the day. And that would also help them develop this relationship with different members of the school community. Restorative circles are also great, similar to class meetings. This is a great place where we can discuss different topics. And I'm not going into specifics because I want to give teachers the freedom to teach it in a way that they feel would be most effective for their children. There's so many ways we could discuss and talk about important skills for children to have in the school environment. And lastly, this is again where I said we're bringing outside resources. For Tier 2 to be most effective, we have to have homeschool plans. This is not necessarily doing schoolwork at home, but how do we engage the families or the support system of this child outside of school? Who do they listen to? Who do they live with? Is it grandparents? Is it their parents, foster parents? Who or what is their support system that we can bring in to help us with this? So homeschool plan provides behavioral support even outside of school. It helps us keep that expectation the same. Remember, we talked about having classroom expectations. So having those expectations in the classroom and outside of the classroom makes the job easier when these children return back to school. So for this level, for Tier 2, what is bullying prevention in the classroom? Number one, it's engagement, connectedness, a sense of belonging, relationships, respect for diversity and differences, and school participation. This is when we want to instill a sense of school spirit, for lack of a better term. And then we talk about safety. Safety is also a way of teaching bullying prevention in the school. Freedom and safety is the freedom from violence. I've talked about different forms of safety. There is physical safety and emotional safety. Freedom from violence would be an aspect of physical safety. Freedom from the anticipation of violence would be an aspect of emotional safety. So physical safety quickly would be just coming into class, you know the doors are locked, you know there is warmth, you know no one is going to jump you in this in the school environment. You are physically safe in the environment. However, emotional safety would be, are you emotionally safe in this classroom? And that could be even from classmates or from adults in the classroom. Are you safe from verbal abuse in the school environment? Are you safe from cyberbullying that could occur even in the presence of adults in that school environment? So emotional and physical safety and protection against all forms of danger is also important to talk about in the classroom. And lastly, the environment, physical, instructional, health and wellness, and disciplinary rules and strategies. The environment would be an aspect, would be a combination of both culture and the school climate. And there is climate assessment. It's very similar to that survey or to that assessment I had in a couple slides ago, of how do we know the type of climate do we have? Do we have a positive climate? Do we have a negative climate? Or do we have an improving climate? And it's good to have a climate assessment either in the classroom or on the school level to just help us monitor how we're doing in our bullying prevention efforts. These are all additional resources for different grade levels. Here I have one of our partners at the University of Central Oklahoma. And his name is Greg Foster. He is an expert in peer mediation. So if you need more resources or if you need help presentation on how to effectively do peer mediation, because in Tier 2, we can do peer mediation with this group of students that are having these challenges, as opposed to like doing a general assembly in Tier 1. In Tier 2, we can do peer mediation with those students. So Greg Foster is a great resource for that. He is actually an expert on peer mediation meetings. So I will keep this video to the end, but moving on to Tier 3 now, I always like to say resiliency is the norm, not the exception. Each and every one of us might have experienced one thing or the other in our lives that we didn't necessarily ask for. But the beauty of it is that most people are actually able to overcome these challenges. We are born to be resilient. However, we can help children build the skills to make them even more resilient. So I'll keep this video till later to see if we have more time. But right now, I would like to go into tier 3. So tier 3, again, like I said, not every child has a significant trauma history, but the needs of those who do can define the success of the entire classroom. So I quickly mentioned in the previous slides, school climate, okay? A beautiful aspect of school climate, which is the strength and weakness of school climate, is that everyone or anyone in the school community can impact school climate. For example, if you have a child come into, let's say you have a positive school climate and you have a child come into your school environment who is badly behaved, okay? If we do not address the bullying behaviors of that child, over time, that would be our school climate. Over time, students will realize that if this boy or this girl is allowed to act this way without any consequences, well, then maybe it's okay for us to act like that. And you would literally see the change in your school climate over time. So this is why it's important to pay attention to those tier 3 kids, because they can impact the entire school climate of the classroom and the school. So this is where we have the MTSS team. By this level, and with tier 2, you're already identifying those kids that might need the extra help for tier 3. So this is also very, very diverse. I mean, this is very dynamic. That's why I cannot provide too specific information, because based on geographical locations, there are some geographical challenges as well. For example, there are some communities that have problem with poverty, and there are some communities that have problem with drugs and violence. So, and sometimes bullying prevention or the challenges we're having in our school system is just a reflection of the community that we're in. So whatever community you're in and whatever the challenges you're facing in that community would influence the type of MTSS team you put together. If you have violence problem in school, it would be great to partner with the police department to help you mitigate these issues. So the MTSS team will frequently review background and baseline data of these children. By this time, you're already collecting data on these kids. They'll provide inventory on the students' strengths, talents, interests, and incentives, and how we can keep them in the school environment. Of course, then together with the input of the child, we'll set academic or behavioral outcome goals and methods for progress monitoring. Again, we can also bring in the Cisco system, the check-in, check-out system in this level as well. Work planning skills, academic survival skill, learning contracts would also be great resources or great intervention strategies for this level. Students with a history of school failure are at a particular risk of falling into the learned helplessness cycle. Yes, so on this level, students are already not feeling like they belong in the school system, okay? These are the type of students that want to get in trouble to be kicked out anyway. So, however, we do not want to indulge them in learned helplessness. This is a stage where they believe that regardless of whatever happened, they cannot overcome their challenges. These are the students who believe that, why should I study? Why should I be in school when I'm not going to amount to anything anyway? And perhaps maybe there are people in their lives who've told them that they're not going to make it far. So this is the level where we do want to build those skills. We want to build the hope and resiliency. And, I do have some slides on that, on how we can build hope and the difference between hope and resiliency. This is where it matters most for these children, just to give them a sense of purpose and belonging in that school environment. These are some more information on tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. The link at the bottom is very active. You can click on that link to get more information on that. And these are all resources, classroom, what we can do in the classroom, more detailed resources on instructional factors of each tier of the MTSS, and they compare and contrast how each tier is different, some resources, timed resources on how we can do this instructions and activities. So I really encourage you to go into that. So for this level, because of the tier 2, tier 3 students, is why I cannot emphasize it enough, the importance of trauma-sensitive practices in schools. So from the left to the right, I have trauma-inducing to trauma-responsive. Trauma-responsive strategies helps us mitigate the cycles that I mentioned in the beginning. It helps us stop that cycle from going on. When you're already having a child having challenges in school, having challenges outside of school at home, the last thing we want to do is to re-traumatize that kid in the school system. So just like we saw in that video with that disengaged onlooker, and I saw that comment in the chat box as well, where somebody mentioned that some adults in the school system are also disengaged onlookers. And I understand sometimes being in the school system might be overwhelming because of other responsibilities that we have, and it seems a lot of times that we're being pulled in multiple directions. But the last thing we want to be to children is to be a disengaged onlooker as an adult. It really communicates negative messages to them. This would also prevent them from speaking up either for themselves or for somebody else in the school environment. So restorative discipline practices, these are examples of how we can positively discipline kids, questions we can ask to help us, instead of just having, if you do this, you get suspended. If you do that, you're getting kicked out. Or should I say, instead of having the zero tolerance system, it's important to have this restorative practices to actually make it an effort to address each situation on a case-to-case basis, to help, and addressing those situations on a case-to-case basis will help children, or would help us identify some specific needs in a child's life that they might not, that might be preventing them from understanding those tier 1, tier 2 strategies that we've been trying to teach. As I have on the left, we cannot punish a child into better behavior. In fact, we can punish them out of the school system. So I've shared this before and I'm sharing this again. This is a decision-making guide for me, and I encourage schools to, you can either develop your own or copy this. As I mentioned, that is good to have that system or to address bullying situation on a case-to-case basis. This is a very good guide in, that would help us make a very equitable, very fair decision as to what consequences are appropriate in bullying situations. So you can copy that. This would help students, this would help schools avoid allegations of, or allegations and accusations of unfairness, of how come so-and-so get this discipline or this consequence, and when that person does it, they get that consequence. And this is also very important, I would say, for schools that have a lot of popular kids. For example, if you have schools that have very good athletic programs, and you and student notice that some students get in trouble for certain situations or for certain behaviors and some students don't. It's good to have a behavioral guide or decision-making guide to make sure that your policy is actually being implemented the same across the board. So factors that predict teachers' response to a bullying situation. There are 3 main variables, and that is individual and professional variables, relational variables, and contextual variables. Number 1 is the teacher's attitudes, beliefs, and knowledge, their level of empathy, self-efficacy, and job satisfaction. Again, like I mentioned, we do have some disengaged onlooker teachers that are, this is not my job, you know, this is above my office type of behavior, or I didn't see anything. I've had parents complain that teachers said they couldn't do anything about the reported bullying behavior because they didn't see it happen. Or maybe children that complained or reported of being called a racial slur, and the teacher said, I didn't hear it. So technically it didn't happen. So we want to avoid that, but those are the Those are the variables that might affect or might predict why an adult or a teacher, an educator, a staff might respond to a bullying situation or not. Then we have relational variables, quality of interpersonal relationships in the school. And this comes from the top down. This is actually an aspect of school culture. It comes from leadership downwards. And lastly, contextual factors, bullying characteristics, available resources, and support for our educators. How can we support teachers to help to empower them? How can we support teachers to empower them to respond appropriately to bullying situations? We have to provide realistic, targeted human support. We have to assume and build on existing teacher capacity, tailor connection to fit their needs, orient teachers to new tools and techniques. Also, as I mentioned, teachers do get bullied as well. It's important to provide resources, to provide support and resources for them as well to address these issues, to make sure that there is good relationship between the co-workers or among the co-workers and leadership as well, that leadership take their concerns seriously and provide support, emotional support for teachers matters as well. Encourage participation in professional learning communities, even outside of school. It might be something that you do leisurely. We do have resources on our website. We do have conferences. The Department of Health also have an ongoing conference right now that they're doing for people involved in child and adolescent health or any child and adolescent professionals. So if you have any other way that educators, you feel educators can be best supported, please put it in the chat box. I would like to include it in my next presentations, because this is how I get ideas and to spread the message out there as well. What works? Teacher practices that promote positive peer relationship and discourage peer victimization, teacher attitudes towards a student and peer attitude towards the student. There is actually, I don't have the statistics on here, but students tend to dislike the student that the teachers dislike, if that makes sense. If a teacher dislikes a kid in the classroom, the students dislike that kid as well. So that's also important to keep in mind when we're addressing bullying in the classroom. If you have a particular feeling towards a child, it's important not to let other students know how you feel personally about a student in your classroom. The emotional tone of teachers with peer preferences also matters in bullying prevention. Classroom management, bullying in the classroom, and teacher practices are all factors that work in preventing bullying in the classroom. And as I have on the left, troubled youth need more than technique. They need transformative experiences with other people. Sometimes you're the only positive experience that these children might have in their entire day. So we're getting towards the end of the presentation now. So foundational knowledge, as I mentioned before, adverse childhood experiences leads to toxic stress, and we could have resiliency or the opposite of resiliency. So lastly, on the other hand, the event could be classroom management or how we set up our classroom. And that could lead into teacher practices. Then the teacher practices could provide positive experiences for the children in the classroom. And of course, that would have effects on classroom behaviors it would have an effect on classroom behaviors that children exhibit. Summary. So bullying is a problem around the world. It is not unique to a school, a classroom, a district, and teachers are key players in efforts to reduce the prevalence of bullying. There is not a single best way for teachers to respond to bullying behaviors, and this is why climate assessment is important, so that you know what works in your classroom and what works in your school. Yes, it's important to have these conversations and to have these trainings like we do. However, it's just to get ideas, not necessarily copy and paste. know how to detect bullying when it occurs. We've talked about different forms of bullying. It's good to just familiarize yourself with your school policy. And I would highly encourage all of us as we get off this call to just get to know what's allowed in your school policy. What does your school policy say about bullying? Because every school or every district should have one anyway. The teacher relationship and interaction with students are influential in the peer ecology. So teachers are socializing agents in the school classroom or in the school environment and in the classroom. And it's important to just pay attention to how we carry ourselves and how we express ourselves in front of our children. Relationship and motivation matters. Resiliency is the norm and not the exception. So as we're rounding up, like I said, that I'm trying to finish 10 to 15 minutes early so I can take more questions. Why do children engage in bullying behaviors? I'd mentioned seeking connection earlier. It could be a lack of interpersonal skills. I've mentioned trauma and ACEs, victim targets or violence themselves. It could be a reflection of the larger community. But right now, I would like to focus on loss of hope and lack of motivation. Okay, it's important to have hope and motivation in the classroom. So hope and resiliency. So going back, this is also a video. I'm looking at my time right now, and it doesn't look like we have time to watch this video. But the video is by Dr. Jordan Peterson. Is a psychologist, is a clinical psychologist, and he talked in the video on why children engaged in aggressive behaviors. When a child feels like they have nothing to lose, they're already perhaps not going to make it far anyway. They're probably going to end up they're probably going to end up in the judicial system or in the justice system anyway. They tend not to care so much the consequences that we give out in the school environment. So then we take a step back, and again, this is for tier 3 kids. So we take a step back to look at what's missing. They might have all those resources or the strategies provided in tier 1, tier 2, but now we focus on hope and motivation. So hope is the cognitive process of goal-directed thinking, including the ability to identify and set pathways to desired goals and to focus in those pathway pursuits. So hope has 2 main factors, and number 1 is a sense of coherence, and number 2 is a locus of control. So number 1, the sense of coherence is the emotional element of hope that is rooted in early experiences of trust. Remember, I have been emphasizing the importance of a comprehensive bullying prevention policy. These children need to know that the policy works the same for everybody. And if they do as they've been told, the policy is going to work the same for themselves as well. They know that they can trust the system. They know that if they were to talk to an adult in the classroom or in the school environment, their situation will be taken care of appropriately. And secondly, we have the locus of control, the belief that they have both the will and the ways to achieve the outcomes they desire. This is why it's important to develop those skills in them, to empower them with those skills that they have the right to change their life. They have the right and the ability to change their life. So we have hope, grit, motivation are all functions of resiliency. Children that are hopeful and children who have motivation and grit tend to be more resilient in the school environment. So resiliency is just simply the return to a normal state of functioning after a stressor or trauma. As I've mentioned, that we do not always have the control over what happens to us, but we have the control over how we react in the school environment. So if they're already in a supportive school environment, in a supportive classroom where they feel like they belong and they have hope that if I study hard, if I do according to what I'm told, I'm actually going to pass my classes. I'm actually might make it out. I may actually graduate if I do as I've been told. So that helps them build resiliency, and resiliency ultimately builds a sense of purpose that wants them to be in that school environment. As I mentioned, that children in tier 3 might only have the school as the only positive environment. In other words, the school might be the only positive environment for those children. So this is why it's important for us to make them feel like they belong in this only positive environment that they might have. I like that. Somebody put in the comment box, the most dangerous creation of any society is the man who has nothing to lose. Absolutely, I couldn't agree more with that. Any positive suggestions in handling a tier 3 student that displays the negativity from their community, home, negative influences? Oh, absolutely. This is where, as I mentioned, tier 3 is where we bring all hands on deck. Okay, so by the time we get to tier 3, I mentioned that it's good to have an MTSS team. At that time, you already have an MTSS team. So don't feel like you're doing this alone. In your MTSS team, you probably have a counselor by this time. Depending on the partnership that you have in the school system, you have a police officer on there, you have school administrators on there. So if you have your counselor, your police officer, your psychologist, and every other people that might be on that team, they would be able to tell you specifically what's needed in that for that child, if that answers your questions. Also, those professionals, having those professionals on your team would be able to tell us what exactly is going on in the community. If you've had opportunity to speak with police officers before, those people see things and they will be able to bring that knowledge to the table to help us help this child on what's going on in the environment. If it's drug related, the school can have partnerships with those with mental health agency, those drug and alcohol agencies that could help and come to school and help. Again, it depends on whatever the problem is in the community. There are so many positive influences that are out there, and also there are so many negative influences that are out there, but there are so many positive resources in our community as well. I hope that answers your question. So I want to cap it all on bullying prevention, on what I do. So beyond the title, this is when you hear bullying prevention, I just want to give you a little bit of insight into my role. So I've broken it down into 4. The fourth one being miscellaneous, everything else that I do, the meetings, the conferences or whatnot. But the first thing that I do that's most important to my role is the training and the resources that I provide. So I do professional developments, climate assessment, program planning and implementation. I am OVEOS certified. I do provide OVEOS training as well. So technical assistance for schools, those are the things that I do in my role. I feel like this is the #1 thing that my position is about. And I liaison with the Department of Health, Department of Mental Health. We do communicate a lot. I do have partnership with that department. And yeah, so this is partly what I do. Secondly, what I do in my role is to collect incident reports. I do receive all the calls. It comes to either my desk phone or my office cell phone, and that is my card at the bottom. I receive all bullying related calls, and I do help families navigate reporting or documenting bullying in the school system. So I do have a document where we keep a record of every and all bullying related calls, and we process them accordingly. And this helps us by keeping a record. It helps us identify hotspots in the state. I just did the one for last year, and we've been able to identify the hotspots for last year, and we provide resources accordingly. So the process typically follows where typically goes like this. So I get a call from a family, depending on the severity of it. I almost always contact the regional accreditation officer for that school, because the regional accreditation officer already have an established relationship with the school. So I do not contact the school directly, because I've already heard the parent's story. So to prevent me from just projecting that on the school, I have an independent person reach out to the school, which is the accreditation officer, to get the school side of the story. So based on what they find out, we both work together. If we need to bring in the directors or the deputy superintendents or the legal department, and then they come in as needed. And of course, we provide resources. Sometimes the schools don't know, they can reach out and ask for resources to provide the issues. And if it's the family that's the problem, we are also able to provide resources. I have done PTA presentations as well. So thirdly, I do bullying prevention policy. And what I do with the policy is to review selected policies. So every year that every school submits their bullying prevention policy, it is my role and responsibility to, based on the hotspots that we have, to go over the school's policy to see if their policy is not comprehensive enough or why they're having these issues. Right now, I am working on revising OSDE model policy, so that should be ready by the next semester. And of course, I provide technical support. At the bottom, I have the rubric that I use for revising or reviewing those policies, or writing a new policy as well. So, and here are the questions that I get, and this is why I've been emphasizing your policy, because it can actually be saving grace, I would say, if you act within your policy, your mandated policy that you submitted to the Department of Education. So here are the questions that I get. How do I report, document a bullying incident? I feel like that should be well detailed in every school policies. So I help the family navigate how do they fill out a bullying prevention form. Some schools have the forms, some schools don't. If the school does not, I encourage them to just send an email. In essence, just leave a paper trail that you communicated with somebody at the school. Secondly, to whom do I report bullying incidents? Again, I always encourage everybody to follow up the chain of command. For schools that have a bullying prevention coordinator, or for schools that do not, you can just follow the obvious chain of command, starting with maybe the counselor, assistant principal, and then you go on to the superintendent. I feel like 90%, or should I say 80 to 90% of the calls that I get can be taken care of on the local level. I've had people call my office even before telling the school principal or informing the superintendent of the bullying situation they're telling me, and have had the regional accreditation officer reach out to the school just for the school to tell us that, oh, I'm only hearing about this issue for the first time. So that does not help anyone's case when we have to do that, because then that takes us back several steps. What happens after I report an incident? Of course, the school can only do what is written in their policy, and this is why it's important to have a very detailed policy. It works for everyone in the school system. The slides, I've had a couple people ask me when the slides would be available. The slides would be available on the Engage website. I'd already sent it to them, so should it be available already? If not, I can get a list of participations and participants and just send it to you all after this. Or if you can get my email address and you can just shoot me an email, I can send it to you right after this presentation if you send me an email. So we can always do it that way as well. And I might even upload it to our website just for convenience. If you want to go on our webpage after this, you can just give me about 10-15 minutes. I can put it on our webpage. At the bottom of the page, you see the presentation up there. I'll do it in about 10-15 minutes. So components of an effective bullying policy, I have it here because this is what it's on the rubric that I go by, and that's the definition and the scope, prevention and intervention, reporting and documenting, investigating and report and responding, and safeguards and support for that. Here is the link to the certificate. I will go ahead and put that in the chat box right now so that you can have that link. So I just dropped the link for the certificate in the chat box. You are more than welcome to download and to click on it. Please let me know if it works. If somebody can click on that link just to make sure before everyone start getting off right now, to make sure that link works for everyone. Awesome. Thank you so much, Lisa. So that's all I have. I promised to finish 10-15 minutes early. We still have 10 minutes to go. If anyone has any question they would like for me to address, can I put the link to the slides? You know what? I'll just go ahead and do that right now. Yes, I can put the link to the slide. Okay, I just included that link in the slide. That's the slide, that's the link to the slide to the presentation, so you're more than welcome to click on it. So I have dropped the link to the certificate and the link for the presentation as well. Thank you all so much. I am going to hang around here till 12 o'clock just to see if anyone has questions or if you need any specific information. Thank you all so much for the compliment, for the comments, for the evaluation. I sincerely appreciate it.